trying to hurt an INFJ almost always backfires. Not because they seek revenge or operate with loud retaliation, but because of the way their personality is wired. Their emotional depth, perceptiveness, intuition, and resilience create a kind of quiet karmic force field around them. People who try to wound them, emotionally, socially, or psychologically, often discover that the harm they intended loops back, exposing their own insecurities or sabotaging their own plans. And the most fascinating part is that INFJs rarely need to lift a finger for this to happen. It begins with the way INFJs understand people. Long before someone makes a harmful move, INFJs have often sensed the shift. They pick up on micro-expressions, tone changes, inconsistencies, and hidden motives. Even when they can't logically explain why, they feel a subtle wrongness. This awareness doesn't stop someone determined to hurt them, but it puts INFJs in a position where they are emotionally prepared. The attacker is convinced they're being clever. The INFJ already recognized the pattern, adjusted their expectations, and mentally stepped back. When the blow finally lands, it doesn't hit the version of the INFJ the attacker thinks they're striking. It hits a version that already built emotional distance and discernment. The attacker expects shock or collapse, but instead, their behavior looks embarrassingly transparent. People who try to hurt INFJs almost always underestimate their strength. Because INFJs are gentle, empathetic, and soft-spoken, others can assume they are fragile. But INFJs have a quiet inner steel that comes from years of surviving emotional intensity, internal battles, and deep introspection. They feel pain more strongly than most, but they also recover in ways others don't expect. Their pain becomes wisdom, their setbacks become insight, and their heartbreak becomes clarity. When someone tries to harm them, the initial emotional impact is real, but what follows is a transformation. INFJs analyze the situation, understand its meaning, integrate the lesson, and come out of it more grounded. The person who tried to hurt them ends up creating a stronger, wiser version of the INFJ they targeted. Another fascinating backfire is social. INFJs rarely expose people, but the truth has a way of revealing itself around them. Because INFJs are consistent, kind, respectful, empathetic, other people tend to trust them. When someone tries to sabotage or smear an INFJ, the contrast becomes glaring. The INFJ's character shines naturally, and the attacker's behavior looks petty or malicious by comparison. Even when INFJs say nothing, people pick up on who's lying and who's sincere. The person who attempts to hurt them can slowly lose credibility, respect, or relationships simply because their actions reveal their nature over time. INFJs don't need to fight. The truth fights for them. Then there's the emotional mirror effect INFJs create without trying. When someone targets them, they often end up confronting parts of themselves they were trying to hide. Hurting an INFJ forces the attacker to confront their own motives, jealousy, insecurities, or unresolved wounds. Because INFJs, without saying a word, reflect these things back. It feels uncomfortable. Sometimes it feels threatening. The person realizes, consciously or not, that the INFJ saw their intention clearly, and this awareness can make them defensive or ashamed. The psychological discomfort often becomes heavier than whatever harm they attempted. Trying to hurt an INFJ also backfires because INFJs detach quietly but permanently. When someone crosses their threshold of trust, an INFJ's door closes with a finality that shocks the offender. The INFJ doesn't rage or retaliate. They simply withdraw their emotional energy, presence, and empathy. This emotional disappearance has a powerful impact on people who relied on the INFJ's support, admiration, or understanding. They suddenly realize what they lost. The person who listened without judgment, who encouraged them when no one else did, who understood them deeply. The attacker ends up feeling the absence more painfully than the INFJ felt the harm. INFJs are also guided by a strong inner moral compass, and life has a strange way of aligning with it. When someone tries to hurt them, the INFJ doesn't chase revenge, but life seems to handle it anyway. Not in a dramatic way, but in subtle shifts, lost opportunities, strained relationships, self-inflicted chaos. People who harm others often carry patterns that eventually catch up with them. INFJs simply happen to be the kind of people who reveal these patterns quickly. But one of the deepest ways hurting an INFJ backfires is psychological. INFJs don't respond to pain with pettiness. They respond with insight. They grow. They heal. They evolve. Every wound becomes a sharper intuition. Every betrayal becomes a better boundary, and every disappointment becomes a higher standard. The person who tried to hurt them expected to shrink their confidence or break their spirit. Instead, they contributed to the INFJ's transformation into someone more self-aware, emotionally mature, and spiritually grounded. The attacker becomes just another chapter in the INFJ's growth story, never the author of it. Trying to hurt an INFJ backfires because they embody a rare combination of softness and depth, intuition and resilience, empathy and discernment. People mistake their kindness for weakness, not realizing it's a conscious choice, not a vulnerability. They assume INFJs will break easily, not knowing INFJs bend, learn, and rise. And they believe their harm will go unnoticed, not realizing INFJ saw it long before it happened. Another reason hurting an INFJ always backfires is that INFJs have a unique ability to disappear into transformation. People who try to wound them often expect a reaction, anger, pleading, emotional collapse, something that validates their attempt. Instead, INFJs go silent. They retreat into themselves, not out of weakness, but out of strategy. In that silence, they heal, reflect, and rebuild. The person who tried to harm them misinterprets that quiet as defeat, but what's actually happening is reinvention. And when the INFJ returns, they come back with clearer boundaries, sharper intuition, and a deeper sense of self. That evolution highlights the attacker's own stagnation, making their behavior look small and immature in contrast to the INFJ's growth. INFJs also possess a rare emotional neutrality when they finally see someone clearly. Once they have processed the pain and understood the motive behind it, the attachment dissolves. The person who tried to hurt them loses access not just to their heart, but also to their emotional influence. This creates an unexpected shift in power. People who intended harm often fed off the INFJ's empathy or sensitivity. They wanted a reaction. But INFJs eventually reach a point where they feel nothing, no anger, no sadness, no longing. That emotional neutrality is devastating to someone who expected drama or vulnerability. It leaves the attacker feeling irrelevant, as though their most calculated attempts barely left a footprint. Trying to hurt an INFJ also exposes the attacker's weaknesses in a way they didn't anticipate. These personality types are natural pattern recognizers. They observe behavior like emotional detectives. When someone tries to manipulate or undermine them, INFJs begin to see the deeper truth behind the actions. They understand the insecurities, the jealousy, the unresolved trauma, or the need for control driving the behavior. This insight becomes a kind of unspoken accountability. The attacker is suddenly aware that their mask has slipped, that the INFJ sees their inner fractures clearly. Even without confrontation, that quiet awareness can create guilt, discomfort, and an internal collapse that feels worse than any external consequence. Another reason attempts to hurt INFJs backfire is the way they inspire unexpected loyalty from others. Even people who don't know them deeply tend to admire their authenticity, their warmth, and their emotional depth. When someone mistreats an INFJ, the social environment often responds instinctively. Friends, colleagues, or even casual acquaintances pick up on the imbalance and side with the INFJ without being asked. It's not because the INFJ campaigns for sympathy, they almost never do, but because people can feel their sincerity. This natural support system forms around them, and the person who tried to hurt them ends up isolated, questioned, or even confronted by others who recognize the injustice. INFJs also have a way of thriving after pain. Something about their internal wiring allows them to turn emotional wounds into fuel for creativity, purpose, and meaning. After someone tries to damage them, INFJs often redirect that energy towards something deeply fulfilling: art, writing, work, spiritual growth, or personal evolution. They channel the pain into something beautiful and powerful. Meanwhile, The person who tried to hurt them watches them rise when they expected them to crumble. That contrast creates a silent but undeniable regret in the attacker, who now sees themselves as the catalyst for the INFJ's glow up rather than their downfall. Another backfire comes from the INFJ's ability to love deeply and withdraw completely. People who attempt to hurt an INFJ often do so out of familiarity. They have benefited from the INFJ's love, loyalty, or understanding. When that emotional warmth disappears, they feel a coldness they were never prepared for. INFJs don't do half-hearted detachment. When they emotionally disconnect, it's absolute. And because their presence carries such emotional richness, their absence feels like a void. The person who harmed them starts to feel the impact of losing a rare kind of connection, the kind they may never experience again in the same depth or purity. There's also a subtle spiritual element to why harming an INFJ backfires. INFJs live with a sense of purpose and integrity that naturally aligns their lives in meaningful ways. Their intentions are rarely malicious. They treat people with respect, compassion, and care. When someone targets a person like that, it creates a spiritual imbalance. Life has a way of restoring equilibrium, and the imbalance usually doesn't favor the one who caused the harm. INFJs continue rising, finding opportunities, meeting the right people, and evolving in ways that make the attack seem insignificant. Meanwhile, the one who attempted harm often finds themselves stuck in the consequences of their own negativity. Trying to hurt an INFJ backfires because they become wiser about people over time. Every wound sharpens their discernment. They learn how to spot similar personalities in the future. They notice red flags sooner. They establish boundaries earlier. They build healthier connections and avoid situations that once left them vulnerable. The person who hurt them becomes a teacher they never asked for, but ultimately benefited from. The lesson strengthens them, protects them, and guides them into a future where fewer people have the ability to harm them. The person who tried to hurt an INFJ ends up playing a role they never intended. They become the catalyst for the INFJ's next stage of strength, clarity, and evolution. And in the end, the pain they try to cause becomes the very thing that distances them from the INFJ forever and elevates the INFJ beyond their reach.